The library had been quiet for hours, save for the ticking of the wall clock and the faint hum of the old fluorescent lights. Margaret Vance, the town's humble librarian, had been working here for 32 years. She'd catalogued thousands of books, mended countless broken spines, and listened patiently to patrons' stories that rambled on far longer than necessary. The library was her second home, its dusty scent and worn oak shelves as familiar as her own skin. That afternoon, while reshelving a stack of reference atlases, she noticed something odd. In the corner of the back room, hidden behind a leaning stack of obsolete encyclopedias, was a narrow metal cabinet she'd never paid much attention to before. Its drawers were locked, the paint chipped and flaking. She crouched down, brushed away a layer of dust, and read the faded brass label, Archival, Private. Her curiosity, usually subdued, flared. Margaret fetched the old keyring from her desk, one heavy with mismatched keys whose purposes had long been forgotten. One by one, she tried them. None fit. With a sigh, she reached for a paperclip, straightened it, and wiggled it in the lock. Years of fixing stubborn filing cabinets had given her a knack for such things. The lock gave a reluctant click. Inside, beneath a layer of yellowed library memos and brittle invoices from the 1940s, lay a single brown envelope. Its paper was fragile, edges curled with age. Written across the front in an unfamiliar hand were the words, "To be opened only by one who seeks." Margaret's fingers trembled as she slid the contents onto the desk. A sheet of thick parchment unfolded to reveal an intricate, hand-drawn map. The ink was faded, but the lines were clear. Rivers, mountains, and a cluster of symbols around what looked like an ancient city. In the corner was a script she didn't recognize, looping and geometric. She stared, heart pounding. The INDUS script. That much she guessed from her dim memories of a college course she'd once taken. But the Indus Valley civilization was ancient, its cities long excavated and catalogued. This map, however, showed a location far from the known sites. For a long moment, she simply sat there, the library's stillness pressing in around her. A part of her told her to slide it back into the envelope, lock the drawer, and forget it. Another part, the one that had stayed up nights reading about lost civilizations, shipwrecks, and uncracked codes, wouldn't let go. A faint, almost ridiculous thought crossed her mind. Could this be real? She lifted the map to the light, noticing faint watermarks in the parchment, the kind she'd seen only in preserved archival documents. Whoever had drawn this had known their geography. Every bend in the river matched with precision. She felt the pull of a mystery much larger than herself. But Margaret also knew she wasn't the person people called when they wanted something groundbreaking. She was the quiet librarian, the woman who remembered everyone's late fees and made sure school children had the books they needed for projects. Still, the map lay before her like an invitation she couldn't decline. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Dr. Lawrence Gray's life. Sliding the map back into its envelope, she locked the library door for the night. She would take it to someone who could tell her what it meant. She didn't know yet that this decision, this single small step, would draw her into a chain of events that would change her life and rewrite history. Dr. Lawrence Gray's office at the university looked exactly as Margaret had imagined. Dimly lit, smelling faintly of dust and old paper, the walls lined with teetering stacks of journals and books. She'd made an appointment under the guise of donating a potentially interesting historical item to the university's archives. When she walked in, clutching the envelope. Dr. Gray barely looked up from his laptop. His greying hair stuck up in odd directions, and his glasses were smudged. "Yes, Miss Vance, is it?" he said, adjusting his spectacles and gesturing for her to sit. "Let's see what you've brought." Margaret placed the envelope on the desk. The professor opened it with the casual air of someone expecting yet another amateur's discovery of a mass-produced replica. But the moment he unfolded the parchment, his brow furrowed. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the script in the corner. "This," he muttered, tracing a finger along the inked lines. "It's meant to resemble the INDUS script, and these topographical features. Curious." Margaret felt her heart lift until his expression shifted. He leaned back in his chair and chuckled. "Ah, I see. A clever forgery. Probably something a student mocked up for fun years ago. The Indus Valley sites are well mapped, Miss Vance. There's no lost capital waiting to be found." "But," she began, "the river bend here matches—" He waved her off with a dismissive flick of the wrist. "Coincidence. Amateurs always think they've stumbled on something grand. You wouldn't believe how many treasure maps I've seen in my career. Most of them lead to nowhere more exciting than a farmer's field." Her cheeks flushed. She had known he might be skeptical, but the ease with which he dismissed her stung. "I just thought," she said quietly, "it might be worth a closer look." Dr. Gray smiled condescendingly, the way a teacher might smile at a child who had just mispronounced a word. "Leave it with me, and I'll make sure it's stored in the proper place." Something in his tone set off an alarm in Margaret's mind. She reached for the map and slid it back into the envelope before he could protest. "I think I'll hold on to it for now," she said. He raised an eyebrow, his condescension sharpening into mild irritation. "Suit yourself, Miss Vance. But I assure you, if there were anything here worth investigating, the world's top archaeologists would already know about it." As she left his office, her heart pounded, not from embarrassment, but from something else. A small, stubborn flame had been lit. His arrogance had only confirmed her suspicion. There was more to this map than met the eye. On the train ride home, she took the envelope from her bag and studied it again. Under the sunlight streaming through the window, she noticed faint, uneven ink blotches in the corner. They weren't random. They looked like they might conceal additional markings, invisible unless viewed under the right conditions. Her mind flashed back to an old book she had once read about hidden codes in historical documents, how scribes sometimes layered ink to disguise information from prying eyes. She smiled faintly to herself. Dr. Gray might have laughed her out of his office, but he had made a mistake. He had underestimated her. By the time the train pulled into her stop, she had already decided. She would follow the map herself, and she would prove him wrong. The next morning, Margaret spread the map across her kitchen table. The sunlight filtering through the lace curtains caught on the parchment's texture, revealing details she had missed before. She pulled a magnifying glass from a drawer and leaned close, tracing the faint lines with a fingertip. She remembered the ink blotches she had noticed on the train and fetched an old blacklight lamp she had once used for detecting water damage in books. Switching it on, she swept the light slowly across the parchment. Her breath caught. Beneath the visible map, faint lines bloomed into view, an overlaid diagram drawn in some kind of ultraviolet reactive ink. It wasn't another map exactly, but a set of coordinates and small sketches, a jagged rock formation, a narrow gorge, and something that looked like a temple facade carved into a cliff. Margaret sat back, pulse racing.
She knew enough about the Indus Valley civilization to realize this was not something anyone had ever published.
The ruins were typically on flat floodplains. This suggested a mountainous location. She turned to the envelope again, checking if anything else was hidden. Her fingers brushed against a seam in the paper. Carefully, she peeled it apart. A second sheet slid out. A folded, brittle letter written in that same looping geometric script. The characters were unfamiliar, but a few words in faded English were scrawled at the bottom. To the one who finds this, trust the river's dry bed. The city sleeps where the earth hides its waters. A shiver ran through her. She thought of the map's marked river bend and the dry, cracked channels she had seen in photographs of the region. That night, she sat at her laptop, cross-referencing the map with modern satellite images. It took hours, but eventually she spotted it, a distinctive, horseshoe-shaped rock formation matching the sketch on the hidden overlay. It was deep in a remote area of Pakistan, far from the well-known Harappan excavation sites. Margaret hesitated. This was no casual research project. The area was rugged, possibly dangerous, and she had no experience in field archaeology. Yet the more she thought about it, the more the idea of handing it over to someone like Dr. Gray felt unbearable. She knew he'd take credit for the find, lock her out, and dismiss her as nothing more than the woman who happened upon the clue. For the rest of the week, she could hardly focus on her library duties. Every time she shelved a book, her mind drifted to that dry riverbed, to what might be hidden beneath centuries of dust and sand. One evening, she stood in front of her modest savings account statement, chewing her lip. It wasn't much, but it was enough for a flight, transport, and a local guide. Barely. Margaret's hands trembled as she booked the ticket. She didn't tell anyone, not her colleagues, not her sister in Boston, not even Mrs. McKinney, the elderly patron who always knew everyone's business. She only packed light. Sturdy shoes, a wide-brimmed hat, and the map, carefully wrapped in plastic. As the departure date drew near, she caught herself whispering aloud in the quiet of her kitchen, as though speaking to someone who wasn't there. "I'll find it. I'll see it with my own eyes." She didn't know it yet, but that vow would carry her far beyond the safety of bookshelves and reading rooms, into a place where history itself lay sleeping, waiting for her to wake it. The airplane's cabin lights dimmed as Margaret stared out at the endless quilt of clouds. She had never travelled this far alone before. Her passport felt almost foreign in her bag, still stiff from years of disuse. When the captain announced their descent into Karachi, her stomach tightened, not from fear exactly, but from the weight of what she was about to attempt. The heat hit her the moment she stepped off the plane. The air smelled faintly of dust and diesel, the sun a blazing coin overhead. She clutched her map as though it were a lifeline. Margaret had arranged to meet her guide in the arrivals hall. A man in his late 30s stood with a hand-lettered sign. Vance. He introduced himself as Farid, his voice soft but steady. His English was clipped, precise, and his eyes lingered on the map tube slung over her shoulder. "This is not a place for tourists," he said, after their initial greetings. "Where you wish to go, there is no road, only tracks, and sometimes not even those." "That's why I need you," Margaret replied. She told him only the basics: a personal research project, an interest in Indus Valley sites. She did not mention the hidden ink or the letter's cryptic instructions. The next morning, they set out in a battered jeep, rattling over dry plains that stretched into the horizon. They passed shepherds guiding thin, dusty flocks and small clusters of mud-brick homes. Occasionally, a child would wave, their laughter carrying faintly on the wind. Farid drove for hours before stopping at a tea stall where a few old men sat in the shade of a neem tree. He spoke with them in Urdu, while Margaret sipped the bitter, cardamom-laced tea. She noticed their eyes flick toward her, then away. When Farid returned, his expression was unreadable. "They speak of a place," he said finally. "An old village, abandoned. They call it Shorkasheher, the City of Silence." Her pulse quickened. "Where is it?" "2 days' drive north, then on foot. They say it is cursed, that the earth swallowed it after a great flood." Margaret's mind jumped to the letter's words. "The city sleeps where the earth hides its waters." She felt the map's weight in her bag like a heartbeat. The second day's drive was rougher, dirt tracks dissolving into uneven terrain. Mountains rose in the distance, their jagged edges cutting into the sky. At night, they camped under a sky littered with stars. Margaret lay awake, the desert wind whispering through the tent, wondering if she was a fool to believe in a scrap of parchment over the certainty of modern scholarship. On the morning of the third day, they crested a ridge. Below, nestled in a valley choked with dry shrubs, lay the remains of an old village. Walls of crumbling stone, doorways gaping like broken teeth. Farid cut the engine, and the sudden silence pressed in on them. Margaret stepped out, the ground crunching beneath her boots. The air was still, unnervingly so, as if the place were holding its breath. "This is as far as I go without knowing more," Farid said quietly. "You must tell me why you have come here." Margaret hesitated. She could keep her secret, but if the terrain ahead was as dangerous as he warned, she would need his trust. She reached into her bag, drew out the map, and held it open for him to see. His eyes widened. Slowly he traced a finger along the dry riverbed marked in the corner. "I have seen this shape," he murmured. "From above, when I was young, riding in my uncle's small plane, there was something. Stone, where no stone should be." Margaret's breath caught. For the first time she felt she was standing on the threshold, not just of a place, but of a secret that had waited centuries for her to arrive. The abandoned village felt like a place caught between worlds, neither entirely dead nor truly alive. Broken walls rose in uneven rows, their stones scorched by the sun. Sand had crept into doorways, filling the spaces where people once lived. Margaret followed Farid through the maze of ruins. The silence was oppressive, as if even the wind hesitated to move here. An elderly man appeared from the shadow of a half-collapsed archway. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and his eyes were clouded with age, but his gaze fixed on Margaret with surprising intensity. Farid spoke with him in low tones, his voice carrying a note of deference. After a few minutes, Farid turned to her. "He says his people used to speak of Sheher Nietzsche, the city below. It lies beyond the gorge. Only fools and the desperate go there." The old man beckoned Margaret closer. His voice was raspy, the words shaped slowly. Farid translated. "They say the earth took the city when the river vanished, but the city waits, always waits." Margaret felt a shiver travel down her spine. She unfolded the map and showed him the sketched rock formation. The man's eyes widened. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small, smooth stone carved with strange markings. They matched the geometric style of the Indus script. He pressed it into her palm. "For the door," Farid translated simply. They set out at dawn the next day, heading toward the gorge. The terrain grew harsher, jagged rocks, thorny shrubs, and narrow ledges that dropped into dry ravines. The sun was relentless, the air dry enough to crack her lips. By midday, they reached the gorge. It yawned before them,
a deep scar in the earth, its walls sheer and pitted. Margaret scanned the rock face, searching for the formation from the hidden overlay. And then she saw it. A horseshoe-shaped outcrop, just as the ultraviolet ink had shown. As they approached, the ground began to shift under their feet. A low, grinding rumble echoed through the gorge. Sand and loose stones tumbled down from above. "Storm!" Farid said sharply. "We must move quickly." The wind rose suddenly, hot and stinging. A wall of sand began to roll toward them from the west, swallowing the horizon. Margaret's scarf whipped around her face as she clutched the map to her chest. They ran toward the rock formation, the storm at their backs. The sandstorm hit like a physical force, stealing her breath and scouring her skin. She stumbled, nearly losing her footing, but Farid's grip on her arm kept her moving. Then, through the shifting veil of sand, she saw it. A corner of worked stone, protruding from the base of the outcrop, newly exposed by the storm's force. Even half buried, the carved lines were clear, familiar symbols she recognized from the letter. Margaret dropped to her knees, brushing away the sand with frantic hands. The markings formed the outline of a doorway. In the center was a shallow indentation, just large enough for the carved stone the old man had given her. She pressed it into place. A deep, hollow sound resonated through the rock. Somewhere beneath them, something shifted. The storm howled around them, but Margaret barely noticed. She had just unlocked the threshold to a city the world had forgotten. The grinding noise reverberated through the gorge, vibrating up through Margaret's knees. She and Farid exchanged a glance, half fear, half awe, as the carved stone she had pressed rotated with a slow, deliberate click. Sand poured away from the rock face, revealing the outlines of a narrow archway. Its lintel was etched with the same looping script as the letter, the characters deep and sharp despite their age. Margaret's breath caught. It wasn't merely a doorway, it was a seal, one that had been undisturbed for centuries. "Quickly," Farid urged, casting nervous glances at the shifting storm above. They ducked inside. The sudden coolness of the interior was almost shocking. Their footsteps echoed against walls of smooth sandstone blocks. A faint trickle of air drifted through the passage, carrying with it the scent of earth and something faintly metallic. Margaret's eyes adjusted to the dimness, revealing faded murals along the walls, scenes of rivers, processions, and tall tiered buildings. Some depicted figures holding bowls toward a great central pool. Others showed caravans laden with goods. "This is," Margaret whispered, trailing her fingers over the paint. "Nothing like Mohenjo-Daro or Harappa. This is untouched," Farid finished quietly. They moved deeper, the corridor sloping downward until it opened into a vast chamber. The ceiling soared above them, supported by massive square columns carved with patterns like interwoven vines. In the center lay a dry basin the size of a swimming pool, its floor tiled in intricate geometric mosaics. Margaret crouched, tracing a mosaic tile with her fingertips. The basin had been a reservoir, perhaps the waters the letter had spoken of. Without the river, the city must have died, leaving only silence behind. Farid's voice pulled her back. "We are not alone." She followed his gaze to a far corner of the chamber where two figures stood, men in dusty hiking gear, one holding a camera, the other a crowbar. They froze at the sight of Margaret and Farid. One of the strangers stepped forward, a thin smile on his face. "Guess the rumors were true. And here we thought we'd have to dig for weeks." His accent was British, his tone laced with arrogance. Margaret realized instantly they were treasure hunters. "This place is not for you," she said firmly, rising to her feet. The man chuckled. "Lady, history belongs to those who find it and profit from it." He gestured toward the mosaic basin. "Gold, jewels, artifacts. They'll fetch more than your library's annual budget." Before she could reply, a low groan echoed through the chamber. The sandstorm above had shifted something. The floor trembled, dust raining down from the ceiling. Farid stepped in front of her. "We leave now," he said to the intruders, "or the earth will bury us all." The British man's companion hesitated, glancing upward as another tremor shook the chamber. Margaret felt a crack form beneath her feet, splintering across the mosaic. In that moment, she understood the truth. If this site was to be preserved, she could not let its location become common knowledge, not to men like these. She locked eyes with Farid. "We seal it," she whispered. He nodded once, and together they began backing toward the corridor, the rumble of collapsing stone chasing them. The intruders shouted behind them, but Margaret didn't look back. As they reached the archway, Farid yanked the carved stone free from its slot. The door ground shut, the sound echoing like the closing of an enormous tomb. When the storm finally passed and the sun reappeared, the gorge looked as if it had never yielded its secret. Only Margaret and Farid knew what slept beneath their feet. They camped far from the gorge that night, the embers of their small fire throwing long shadows against the barren hills. Margaret sat wrapped in her scarf, the map laid carefully across her knees. She could still feel the tremor in her bones, the echo of the door sealing shut. Farid poured tea into 2 dented tin cups. "They will return," he said quietly. "Men like that, they do not give up easily." Margaret knew he was right. The British men had seen enough to confirm the legend was real. If they survived the storm and the collapsing stone, they would tell others. The site's peace would be short-lived unless she acted. Her gaze drifted to the letter, now lying beside the map. "The city sleeps where the earth hides its waters." It wasn't just a riddle. It was a warning. This place was meant to be protected, not plundered. When they returned to the nearest town, Margaret found herself the unwilling center of attention. Whispers followed her through the marketplace. Foreign woman, strange papers, dangerous journey. She saw a man with a telephoto lens snapping photos from a rooftop and quickly pulled her scarf higher. That night, in their small guest house, Farid showed her the messages lighting up his phone. Online forums already buzzing with talk of a hidden Indus city based on leaked rumors from the desert. Someone had spoken, perhaps one of the treasure hunters, perhaps even one of the villagers. The following day, they went to the regional heritage office. Margaret insisted on speaking to the director privately, showing him only the most basic sketches of the site and withholding its exact coordinates. She explained the fragile state of the structures and the need for immediate protection. The director's eyes narrowed. "If this is true, international teams will want access. There will be politics, funding battles, ownership disputes." Margaret leaned forward. "And if you wait, there will be nothing left to argue over. Looters will strip it to the foundations." Her words seemed to reach him. He promised to send a small, trusted team to begin discreet documentation under the cover of an unrelated geological survey. It was a compromise she could live with, protection without the fanfare that would draw scavengers. 2 days later, Margaret boarded her flight home. The map and letter remained in her possession, locked inside a slim metal case. As the plane lifted above the desert, she pressed her forehead to the window,
watching the endless brown stretch fade into clouds. She thought of the murals, the dry basin, the carved doorway sealed once more. Part of her longed to have stayed, to watch the city emerge into the light of day after centuries in darkness. But another part of her knew she had done the right thing. In the seat beside her, Farid sipped his tea from a paper cup, his eyes half closed. Before they parted ways, he said something that stayed with her. History belongs to the earth first. Only after that does it belong to us. Margaret tucked the words away in her heart. The world would learn of the City of Silence someday, but on her terms, when it could be revealed without being destroyed. 6 months later, the small-town library looked much as it always had. Rows of shelves, the familiar scent of old paper, the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. But to Margaret, it no longer felt like the same place. She sat at her desk. A letter from the Regional Heritage Office opened before her. The discreet survey team had confirmed her suspicions. The site was authentic, unlike any other Indus Valley city yet documented. Its architecture suggested it had been a ceremonial and trade hub, possibly even the civilization's political heart before it was lost to drought. The letter ended with a line that made her smile. Your role in safeguarding this site will be recorded in the official history. She ran a hand over the desk drawer where the map and letter now rested, sealed in a fireproof case. Their exact location remained known only to her, the heritage director, and Farid. The treasure hunters had never resurfaced publicly, perhaps buried under the shifting sands, perhaps simply waiting for another opportunity. In the weeks since her return, life had settled back into its usual rhythms, checking in books, helping schoolchildren find resources, sharing quiet conversations with elderly patrons. Yet she carried something now that none of them could see, the knowledge that she had touched history and left it better than she found it. One rainy afternoon, a young girl came into the library clutching a notebook. She approached Margaret shyly. I'm doing a project on lost cities, she said. Do you think there are still some out there that haven't been found? Margaret smiled, leaning across the desk. Oh yes, she said softly. Some are still sleeping, and sometimes it's the quietest people who wake them. The girl's eyes lit up. I want to find one someday. Then start with curiosity, Margaret advised. It's more valuable than any map. That night, long after the library had closed, Margaret sat in the back room with the lights dimmed. She unsealed the case, unfolding the map one last time. The ink still shimmered faintly under her blacklight, the coordinates unchanged. She thought of Farid's words. History belongs to the earth first. She had carried them home like a secret blessing. The City of Silence would remain safe for now, guarded by sand, stone, and time, and when the world was ready to treat it with the respect it deserved, she would be there, ready to tell the story, because history wasn't just about what was found, it was about who protected it. And sometimes the greatest discoveries were not the ones shouted from rooftops, but the ones preserved in silence. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.